My name is Claire Merritt and I am 31 years old. The call came over the paramedic radio at 11:47 on a Tuesday night in November. I was at the nurse's station in Bay 4 reviewing a chart when my charge nurse flagged the incoming transmission, female, 31 years old, 31 weeks gestation, onset of severe frontal headache approximately 90 minutes prior. Visual disturbance described as spots and tunnel narrowing, increasing confusion during transport. Blood pressure on scene 178/116, repeat in the ambulance 184/119 and climbing. ETA 3 minutes. I pulled on a fresh pair of gloves and told my resident to clear Bay 2 and set up the magnesium protocol. What nobody on that radio transmission knew was that the patient on the gurney was my sister. And the people in the waiting room behind her, the ones who had been sitting with her at a birthday dinner I was not invited to when it started, were about to walk through those double doors and find out that the ER attending on duty, the physician their daughter's life was now depending on, was the same daughter they had left alone on a graduation stage 3 years earlier to attend a gender reveal party. But before I tell you what happened in that waiting room, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment with where you are watching from today. I read every single one. Let me take you back to the beginning. I grew up in Dalton, Michigan. Population 6,000 and change. A waterfront town on the western side of the state where the summers were short and perfect, and the winters ran 6 months and required a specific tolerance that either grew in you or didn't. The main employer was a manufacturing plant on the south end of town called Meridian Components, which had been there since 1974 and which employed about a third of Dalton's working adults in one capacity or another. My father, Dennis Merritt, was a floor supervisor at Meridian for 28 years. He drove the same route to the same parking spot in the same truck for 2 decades and tracked the same shift rotations with the same clipboard until the plant went digital in 2014, and he spent 3 weeks learning the software and then used it exactly the way he had used the clipboard. He was not a complicated man. He was a reliable one, and for most of my childhood I understood those as the same thing. It took me longer to understand the ways they were different. My mother, Karen, worked at the school district administrative office handling enrollment records and transfer paperwork. She was the kind of woman who knew everyone's business without anyone deciding to tell her, not through gossip but through proximity and the specific attentiveness of a person who notices things. She remembered the names of people's dogs and the birthdays of children she had processed enrollment forms for 7 years ago. She carried an entire social geography of Dalton in her head and updated it daily the way other people updated their calendars. She was also the center of our household in a way that was never designated and never questioned. If something needed to happen, Karen knew when and how and who needed to be involved. My sister Brooke was 2 years older and had understood from approximately the age of 8 something about the way our family worked that I could not fully articulate until my late 20s. She understood that warmth in our household moved toward visibility, and Brooke was extraordinarily visible. She was the kind of person whose presence changed the temperature of a room, not through any single quality but through the combination of all of them working together at once. She was funny and loud and magnetic, and she played soccer through all 4 years of high school and captained the team her junior year and got homecoming queen her senior year and dated the same boy for 3 years, and everyone in Dalton expected her to be happy, and she delivered on that expectation thoroughly. My father called her by a nickname he had given her when she was 4 years old, and he used it until she was 30. My mother's face did something specific and involuntary when Brooke walked into room, a softening that she was not aware of and that I documented internally from the time I was about 10 years old without knowing what to do with the documentation. I was the one who stayed in my room and read, who organized my binders by subject and color from the time I was in 4th grade, who got a 3.9 GPA without anyone suggesting I should, who did not walk into rooms and change their temperature because I did not particularly want to change rooms. I wanted to understand things. I was 15 years old and sitting in Mr. Caldwell's AP biology class on a Tuesday in September when he walked through the mechanism of compensatory shock. He described the way a body responds when it begins to lose blood pressure, the cascade of chemical signals, the vasoconstriction and the tachycardia, and the shunting of blood toward the organs that cannot wait, and underneath all of it a system so precisely engineered for survival that it will sacrifice the extremities to protect the core, right up until the moment it cannot sacrifice anything more. I sat in that class and felt something shift in the direction I was pointed. That was the decision. Tuesday afternoon, biology class, the mechanism of how a human body fights to stay alive. What followed was 11 years of the most demanding and consequential work of my life, and I will not rush through it because it matters to what happened in the waiting room. College at the University of Michigan on a full academic scholarship. I had applied to 4 schools and been accepted to all 4 and chosen Michigan because of the research opportunities and the pre-med advising program, and also, if I am honest, because it was far enough from Dalton to feel like I was going somewhere on my own terms. I worked 20 hours a week in the research lab during my last 2 years to fund my MCAT preparation and application process for medical school. I scored in the 94th percentile the first time I took it. When I told my parents the score, my mother said, "Is that good?" My father said, "Very good, Claire." My sister said nothing because she was at a bridal expo with her boyfriend Jason and the text went unread for a day and a half. I applied to 12 medical schools and was accepted to 4. I chose Wayne State University School of Medicine in Detroit. Rigorous program, strong match rates. A residency advising team that had a reputation for placing students in competitive emergency medicine programs if that was the direction you chose. Emergency medicine was always the direction I was choosing. Since the Tuesday afternoon in September, I just had to get there. Medical school was 4 years of discovering that the thing you were made for requires everything you have without reservation or remainder. Every hour, every cognitive resource, every piece of discipline that you have assembled from every part of your life that required it. I was not the smartest person in my class. I established that by the end of the first semester without resentment, just accuracy. But I was the most organized and the most consistent, and I had a specific tolerance for the sustained pressure of the work that came, I think, from a childhood of being the one who did the thing without being watched. You develop endurance in the absence of an audience. And I graduated in the top quarter of my class. My match letter from Wayne State arrived on a Thursday in March of my 4th year. Emergency medicine residency at Hargrove Regional Medical Center in Grand Rapids. I called my parents the same afternoon. My mother said, "Emergency medicine, is that the one where you work in the emergency room?" I said, "Yes." She said, "That sounds very intense." My father said, "Grand Rapids is a long drive." Brooke texted congratulations with a single exclamation point. I printed the match letter, framed it, hung it above my desk. It was the only piece of paper I ever framed in 4 years of medical school, not because I did not earn other things worth framing, because that one was the specific proof that the direction I had pointed myself toward at 15 was real and was arriving. My graduation from medical school was on a Saturday in May, the Fox Theater in Detroit. 212 students. One of the oldest and most beautiful buildings in the city used for exactly this purpose, for the formal recognition that something significant has been completed, and the person who completed it deserves a room that reflects the weight of what they have done. I had 4 tickets. I sent them to my parents in early March with a letter that included parking directions, the ceremony start time, and the reservation I had made for dinner afterward at a restaurant 2 blocks from the theater. 6 seats. Me, my parents, Brooke and Jason, and whoever else wanted to come. I had been planning this dinner since the fall, my first family celebration for something I had built entirely myself. In April, Brooke announced her gender reveal party. It was the same weekend as my graduation. I do not believe Brooke scheduled the party on that specific weekend deliberately. I have thought about this carefully over 3 years, and I do not believe she saw my graduation date and chose that one to conflict. I believe she chose the weekend that worked for Jason's family and her friends without thinking about the conflict at all. The oversight was accidental. What happened next was not. My parents called on a Thursday evening. My mother talked. My father was in the background, present but not intervening. The posture of a man who had made a decision he was not comfortable with, but had made anyway. She said, "We are in a very difficult situation. Brooke's party is the same weekend. Jason's parents are flying in from Florida. His entire family will be there. It is a once-in-a-lifetime moment." I said, "So is a medical school graduation, Mom." She said, "I know, honey. We know. We are so proud of you. But Brooke needs us there and everyone is expecting us and we do not know what to do." I said, "I sent you tickets in March. I made a dinner reservation. I told you about this date in November." She said, "Couldn't you video call in? Brooke could see you cross the stage from the party. We could all celebrate together." I held the phone and looked at the match letter on the wall. I said, "I am not going to video call into my own graduation." My father got on the line. He said, "We are proud of you. You know we are. We just cannot be in two places. Brooke needs us there, Claire, I said, and I need you here. A silence of about 4 seconds. He said, we will make it up to you. A big celebration dinner the week after. Just the family. I said, okay, Dad. I hung up. I sat at my desk for a long time. Then I transferred 2 of the 4 tickets to my classmate Priya and her boyfriend. I kept 2 in case anything changed. Nothing changed. I called the restaurant and reduced the reservation to 3 people, me and whoever 2 people I could find to come with me. My roommate Jess and her boyfriend Matt, who drove 2 hours to be there and were in the 4th row and stood up when my name was called. The morning of graduation, I drove to the Fox Theater alone. I parked 2 blocks east and walked in the May sunlight in my cap and gown with the hood folded over my arm and stood in the staging area with 211 other people who had also spent 4 years of their lives on this exact outcome. The staging area had the particular energy of a significant threshold. People whose parents had traveled from other states. People whose grandparents were in the auditorium. People on the phone with relatives who wanted to hear everything described in real time. I put my phone in my gown pocket and stood with Priya, and we talked about the residency that was starting in 3 weeks, and I was entirely present, and I want to be clear about that. I was genuinely there. I was genuinely proud. I had genuinely done this thing, and nobody could undo it. When they called Claire Merritt, I walked across that stage, and the dean shook my hand, and the hood went over my shoulders, and I held the diploma case in both hands, and I looked out at the seats and found Jess in the 4th row, and she was standing. That was my graduation from medical school. Afterward, in the sunlight on the steps, Jess took a photo. I am holding the diploma case in both hands, and there is a smile on my face that is real, because it was real. I was proud. I was tired. I was alone in the way I had been alone for a lot of the most important moments of my life, and I had developed by then a particular relationship with that solitude. Not peace exactly, something steadier than peace. A knowledge that the absence of witnesses does not reduce the weight of what is accomplished. The diploma does not know whether there was anyone in the 4th row. Jess said, "You did it. Everything. Yourself." I said, "Yeah." She said, "That is something to know about yourself forever." She was right. It is. I have that photo on my desk now. Small frame next to the pen holder. I see it every time I sit down to write a chart. My parents took me to dinner the following Saturday at a steakhouse in Hartfield, the town between Dalton and Grand Rapids. A 2-hour dinner where we split a bottle of wine, and my father raised a glass and said to our doctor, and everyone drank. Brooke showed me the gender reveal photos for 45 minutes. Pink cake with raspberry filling. Jason's father crying. 200 guests and a photographer who had captured the whole thing beautifully. I said it looked wonderful and meant it the way you mean things when you are deciding in real time that the alternative to meaning it is worse. On the drive home, I sat in the Hargrove parking lot for a while before I went inside. I had graduated from medical school. I had done it without them. Both of those things were equally true. Residency at Hargrove was 3 years that I will not minimize by description. Emergency medicine residency is the kind of training that does not allow for pretense. The ER is the room where pretense gets removed the fastest because pretense costs time, and time is the only currency that matters when someone is trying to stay alive. You are either prepared for what walks through the door or you are not. The preparation is built from 2 things: knowledge and presence. You can acquire the knowledge if you are willing to work with that level of total commitment. The presence is harder to teach. Either you are fully in the room or you are not. I was fully in the room. Not from the beginning, not perfectly, but I was committed to being fully in the room in a way that did not allow for the half attention of someone who is managing divided loyalties between the work and their own comfort. I had been preparing for this since a Tuesday afternoon in 2007. I was not going to be half present, and I had Dr. Margaret Holt. She was my program director, 54 years old, 30 years of emergency medicine, 17 years of training residents. She had a stillness that I recognized immediately as the specific stillness of someone who had spent 3 decades in the most disordered rooms in a hospital and had learned that stillness is not the absence of action. It is the most efficient form of it. You do not add noise to a crisis. You subtract noise from a crisis. What remains is the clear path to the right decision. She called me into her office after my first 30 days. She said, "You're working harder than anyone in this cohort." I said, "I am trying to catch up to a standard I set for myself." She said, "What standard?" I thought about that. Then I said, the version of the physician I decided I was going to be when I was 15. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, I know doctors who have been practicing for 20 years who have not yet caught up to who they decided to be at 15. Keep going. You are not behind. In year 2, she let me run the overnight solo on a night she was technically still on call, and she sat at the nurse's station at the other end of the floor and watched me without intervening for 6 hours. Afterward, she said, you made 3 decisions under time pressure that I would have made identically. That is not common in a second year. In year 3, she wrote my letter of recommendation for the attending position at Hargrove. I asked to read it. She said no. She said, you do not read the letter, you just make sure the years of work that the letter describes actually happened. They did. You will be fine. She came to my residency completion ceremony. She sat in the 3rd row, and when they called my name, she was already standing. Afterwards, she shook my hand and said, you are going to be the kind of physician patients remember for the rest of their lives. Not because of your technical skill, though that is excellent, because you are fully present when it matters most, and patients feel that. They feel when the doctor in the room is actually in the room. She gave me a card. I have it in my desk drawer. On the back she had written, the work you did here was the work of someone who decided something a long time ago and then became it. That is the rarest thing. My parents came to the residency completion ceremony, both of them, on time, in the 2nd row. My father took a photo with his phone, and my mother cried when my name was called. I was glad they were there. I did not mention the graduation they had missed 3 years before. I had filed that in the category of things that are true and settled and do not require reopening, not forgiven exactly, filed. There is a difference. I was offered the attending position at Hargrove Regional Medical Center at the end of my residency. I accepted it and started the 1st week of September. 28 years old, full attending, responsible for every clinical decision in my section of the ER during my shift. The weight of that responsibility is the kind you grow into or you do not. I had been growing into it for 3 years. I was ready. The 3 years between my residency and the Tuesday night in November passed the way the years of serious and absorbing work pass. You are entirely inside them, and when you surface, you look back and they have the clarity of something that happened to a previous and more forming version of yourself. Brooke's daughter, Lily, was born 6 weeks after my residency completion. My parents drove to the hospital the night she went into labor and were in the waiting room when the baby arrived, and my father called me from the delivery floor at 2 in the morning with a voice that sounded like everything he had been waiting for had just walked into a room down the hall. I sent a gift and a card. I met Lily at Christmas. She was 6 weeks old and had Brooke's eyes and Jason's chin, and my mother held her for most of the afternoon. With the specific absorption of a woman who had found her highest occupation, my parents visited Brooke and Jason in the 1st year of Lily's life 11 times. I know the exact number because my mother mentioned it in passing the following spring during a conversation about whether they should visit more frequently, and the number landed in my memory with the weight of things that confirm a pattern you already understood. They visited me twice that year. Once for my birthday. Once when they were already passing through the highway near Grand Rapids. I'm not telling you this to have the count heard. I'm telling you because by year 2 of my attending position, the shape of my family had become something I had accepted as factual rather than as something that still surprised me. My parents loved me. That was true, and I did not doubt it. They loved me the way you love something you are proud of in the abstract, the way you love a distant mountain you are glad exists. They loved Brooke the way you love something you breathe. I had built a life that did not require their daily presence because I had learned over 11 years of the most demanding training available how to build what you need from what you have. I had Jess, who lived 20 minutes away and had coffee with me on Saturday mornings and talked to me about things that had nothing to do with hospital schedules. I had Dr. Holt, who had taken a position at a hospital nearby and who met me for coffee on the 1st Tuesday of every month and whose opinion I trusted on virtually everything. I had my patients who arrived with their bodies in crisis and left either repaired or more honestly understood, and I thought about them on the drives home in the way that work that genuinely matters refuses to stay at work. Brooke announced her 2nd pregnancy in September. The family group text exploded. My father used 3 exclamation points. My mother sent a string of emojis. Extended relatives appeared in the thread like they had been holding their breath for this specific moment. I sent a congratulations. But 2 weeks earlier, I had been named lead attending for the weekend overnight rotation at Hargrove, a performance-based recognition that came with additional responsibility and a formal notation in my record. I had mentioned it to my parents in a phone call. My mother said, "That is wonderful, honey." My father said, "Good for you." The conversation moved to Brooke's morning sickness within 90 seconds. I am not including this for sympathy. I am including it because it is the last piece of context you need to understand the full picture of the Tuesday night in November and what it meant. Brooke was 31 weeks pregnant when it happened. My parents and Brooke and Jason were at the Mill House Grill in downtown Dalton for my father's 61st birthday dinner, a private room they had reserved. Both sets of in-laws, Brooke and Jason, my parents. A party of 6 in a room with a low-light fixture and a birthday cake on order from the kitchen. I was not there. I was not invited. I want to be precise about that because the cleanest version of this story requires precision. It was not a miscommunication or a scheduling oversight. The birthday dinner for my father included his grandchild, his son-in-law, his son-in-law's parents, and his wife. It did not include me. I found this out the next morning. At 10:52 p.m., I was at the nurse's station in Bay 4 reviewing a chart when the radio crackled. My charge nurse flagged me before I registered the words. Female, 31 years old, 31 weeks gestation, severe frontal headache onset approximately 90 minutes ago, visual disturbance described as tunnel narrowing and bright spots, increasing confusion during transport, BPE on scene 178/116, repeat in the ambulance 184/119. ETA 3 minutes, I said. Bay 2, magnesium protocol, get OB on the pager now. I moved. That is what emergency medicine is. You move. I was at the doors of Bay 2 when the ambulance bay opened, and the gurney came through fast, the paramedic reading his report to my resident as they moved. I stepped to the side of the gurney to conduct the primary assessment, and she was turned away from me, head to the right, eyes half open in the unfocused way that tells you the central nervous system is being affected. Her hair was across her face, dark hair. I had been seeing that hair since 1993. I stopped. 1 second. The precise length of a clinical breath and a recognition. My resident looked at me. He had been my resident for 4 months and he had never seen me stop. I said to him, "Start the IV access. 2 large bore, now." Then I stepped to the head of the gurney and said, "Brooke, it is Claire. You are at Hargrove. I am here." She turned her head toward my voice. Her eyes tried to focus with the effortful quality of someone navigating significant neurological interference. She said something that was not quite a word. I said, "I have you, then I work the case. I am not going to give you all 42 minutes in clinical detail. What I will tell you is that severe preeclampsia with the presentation Brooke had that night is a condition that kills women and their unborn children when it is not managed with precision and speed. The magnesium sulfate for seizure prevention, the labetalol for the blood pressure, the continuous fetal monitoring, the labs, the repeat vitals every 3 minutes, the coordination with the OB attending who arrived in 11 minutes and reviewed my management and said, without elaboration, 'Good work.' The continuous assessment of a patient who was also my sister and the internal discipline of keeping those two things in their correct relationship, the patient first, the sister second, because in that room, the patient was the only framework that kept the sister alive. 42 minutes. Her blood pressure came down to 151/98 and was trending in the right direction, fetal heart rate reassured. The OB attending decided to admit to the maternal fetal unit and prepare for the possibility of early delivery based on overnight progression. I stepped out of Bay 2 at minute 43. I had not thought about the waiting room during those 42 minutes because you do not think about the waiting room when you are working. You think about the patient. That is the only way the work functions correctly. Now I thought about the waiting room. I walked through the double doors in my white coat with my stethoscope around my neck and my badge clipped to the lapel. Claire Merritt, MD. My name in blue thread above the Hargrove logo, the same coat I'd been wearing in this building for 3 years. The coat that was as natural to my body at this point as my own hands. My parents were there. My father was standing at the far window with his arms at his sides and the particular posture of a man who is trying to hold himself together by physical arrangement. His birthday shirt, the good one he wore to occasions he wanted to honor, was wrinkled at the collar from however many hours he had been pressing his hands against it. My mother was in the center chair with her purse in her lap like ballast. Jason was at the far end on his phone. My mother saw me first. She stood up and took 2 steps toward me and said, "Can you tell us anything about—" She stopped. Not because I said anything, because she saw my face, and then she saw the coat, and then she saw the badge, and she stopped in the middle of the sentence she had been preparing since the moment she walked through the hospital doors. My father turned from the window. I said, "She is stable." The room went silent in the specific way hospital waiting rooms go silent when the word stable arrives after a word like critical. My mother said my name. Not Dr. Merritt, not the title, just Claire. The name she had given me in a delivery room in Dalton 31 years ago. I said, "Brooke has severe preeclampsia. Her blood pressure was critically elevated when she arrived. We have managed it with medication, and it is coming down. She is being moved to the maternal fetal unit right now. The fetal heart rate is reassured. The OB attending will come speak with you shortly with the full update and the plan going forward." My father had walked across the room during this. He was standing next to my mother with the expression of someone who is assembling and understanding from pieces that are arriving in an order he was not prepared for. He said, "You were her doctor." I said, "I was the attending on duty." He said, "You stabilized her." I said, "With my team." "Yes." My mother's eyes filled. Not the performed kind, the kind you do when you want sympathy. The other kind. The kind that comes from a place you cannot manage. My father said, "Claire." I said, "I need to go back. I have other patients. The OB attending will be out in a few minutes." He said, "Please wait. I need to say something, and I need to say it now before I lose the ability to say it correctly." I waited. He said, "I should have been in that theater when you crossed the stage. 3 years ago, I knew it the morning it happened. I knew it before I left Dalton. I chose wrong, and I knew I was choosing wrong, and I went anyway, because I did not have the courage to do the harder thing." I stood in the waiting room of my own hospital at 11:53 p.m. on a Tuesday night and looked at my father. He said, "I am sorry. That is not a big enough word for what I am apologizing for, but it is the word I have." My mother said, "We are both sorry, Claire. We have been sorry for 3 years, and we kept not saying it, and I do not know what we were waiting for." I looked at them for a moment. Then I said, "I know you are." My mother said, "You were out there alone." I said, "I was not completely alone. Jess was there. My research supervisor was there. The families of my classmates were generous," she said, "but we were not there." I said, "No, you were not." She said, "I think about that day more than you would expect." I said, "I believe you." A silence of about 5 seconds. Then I said, "I built what I built anyway. I need you to know that part. Not to make a point. Just because it is true and it matters that you hear it. Whatever was missing, whatever was not there on that stage, none of it was enough to stop the building. I wanted you to know that." My father said, "I know that, Claire. We have always known that about you. I think that is part of why we thought we could get away with it. Because you would be fine regardless." I said, "That is honest." He said, "It is not a good answer." I said, "No, but it is an honest one, and that is somewhere to start." The OB attending came through the doors behind me at that moment and walked my parents and Jason through the next phase of Brooke's care. I excused myself and went back to the ER because I had 7 other patients and the night had 4 more hours left in it. At 3 in the morning, I sat at the nurse's station and wrote my notes. The ER was in its deep night quiet, the ventilation and the monitors and the elevator opening and closing 2 floors up for nobody. My charge nurse put coffee on the station without saying anything. I sat with the coffee for about 4 minutes. I thought about the Tuesday afternoon in September when I was 15, the cascade of compensatory mechanisms, the way a body reorganizes its priorities under crisis, the engineering of survival. I thought about Dr. Holt saying you are exactly on schedule. I thought about the photo on my desk. The graduation steps, the real smile. I thought about 42 minutes and a blood pressure trending in the right direction and a fetal heart rate that was reassured. I thought about all of it for 4 minutes. Then I finished the coffee and went back to the next chart. Because the work does not pause for what you're feeling. It waits for nothing. And I had learned, over 11 years of building the thing I decided to build, that the most honest use of everything I felt about my family was to pour it into the work. Into being fully present in Bay 2 for 42 minutes, into the protocol and the repeat vitals and the precise timing of the interventions, into being the doctor who was standing there when the gurney came through the doors. Not because I arranged it, not because I had been waiting, Because I showed up to work every night and the work was what it had always been, and I was who I had been training to be since I was 15 years old in a biology classroom in Dalton, Michigan. Brooke delivered her daughter at 33 weeks, 11 days later. The baby spent 2 weeks in the NICU and went home healthy. My mother sent photos from the NICU at all hours and I answered each one. Brooke called me from her hospital bed the day after the delivery. She said, "You saved my life." I said, "I did my job." She said, "Claire." I said, "You are welcome, Brooke." She cried. Then she said, "I need to tell you something. I knew what they chose when they chose the party over your graduation. I knew it was wrong and I did not say anything. I did not push back. I let it happen because I was used to being the one they chose and I told myself that was just how things were. I did not let myself think about what it was like for you on that stage. I said, "Why are you telling me now?" She said, "Because you came into that room and you were you. Completely. And I realized I have been not seeing who you are for a long time because it was easier not to. Because if I saw it clearly, I would have to account for everything I let happen." I said, "I know." She said, "You crossed that stage alone." I said, "I crossed the stage. That part I did not do alone." She said, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means Jess was in the 4th row. It means Dr. Okonkwo was there. It means I have had people around me for a long time who saw the thing I was building. The audience for the stage was small. The people who saw the work were not." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I am going to be better. I do not know exactly what that looks like yet, but I want you to know I am going to try to be better." I said, "I believe you." My parents drove to Grand Rapids 3 weeks after Brooke was discharged, not for a holiday or on the way through somewhere else. They drove specifically to see me, which had happened twice in 3 years and felt, both times, like a gift rather than a given. My mother brought the soup she made every winter. The container was wrapped in a dish towel to keep it warm. We sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours. My father asked about the work. Real questions, the kind that waited for real answers. He asked what a shift looked like from the inside. He asked what the hardest decision was to make under pressure. He asked how I knew what to do when everything was happening at once. I told him, in more detail than I had ever told him anything about my work, because he was asking in a way that had never been available before, the way you ask when you have finally made space for the answer. He said, "I always knew you were going to do something where the stakes were real. I knew that when you were 12 years old and you stayed up until midnight to finish a science project that was not due for a week." I said, "You could have told me that at the graduation." He said, "I know." I said, "You could have been there." He said, "I know, Claire. There is not an answer for that. I chose wrong, and I knew it, and I did it anyway, and I have not one day stopped knowing it since." A silence. I said, "That is enough." He said, "Is it?" I said, "For now. It is enough for now." My mother walked to the window of my apartment and looked at the parking lot and the streetlights. She said, "Tell me what the theater looked like. Tell me what you saw when you crossed the stage." I told her, the gold of the proscenium, the heat of the stage lights, the dean's handshake, the specific weight of the diploma case, the sound of 200 families in the seats, Jess standing in the 4th row. My mother listened with her back to me and her hands on the windowsill. She said, "You were alone out there." I said, "I was not entirely alone, but you were not there, that is true." She turned from the window. She said, "You are extraordinary, Claire. You have always been extraordinary, and we treated it like something that did not need to be seen because it was going to happen regardless of whether we were watching. I am sorry for that. That is a specific thing to be sorry for." I said, "I hear you." She said, "Is that enough?" I said, "It is a start. That is what I have right now. It is a real start." My father washed the soup containers at the sink before they left. He stood with his sleeves rolled to the elbow the same way he stood at the kitchen sink in Dalton when I was growing up, and I looked at his back and felt the specific complicated thing you feel when you're old enough to understand why the people you love made the choices they made and young enough that the choices still carry their weight. He turned off the tap and dried his hands and looked at the photo on my desk on his way to the door. He said, "May I have a copy of that?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I would like to put it somewhere I see it every day." I said, "I will send you one." He nodded. He put on his coat. He said, First doctor in the family. He said it the same way my mother had said it for years, like a fact he had always known and was finally using correctly. My mother's copy went on the mantel in Dalton next to Brooke's wedding portrait. She texted me a photo of the arrangement the day it went up. 2 daughters, side by side, finally in the same frame. I have that text saved. For the same reason I have the graduation photo on my desk and Dr. Holt's card in the drawer, because things that document that you were real, that the work was real, that the building was real, deserve to be kept. Here's what 11 years and one Tuesday night in November taught me. You do not have to wait for the room to notice you. You do not have to arrange the moment where the people who looked past you are forced to look. You do not have to plan the arrival of the gurney or the layout of the waiting room or the scheduling of the shift. You just have to be the person you decided to be on the afternoon the mechanism revealed itself and you understood for the first time what you were built for. The building does the rest. The gurney comes through the doors and you are standing there with the coat and the name and the 31 years of decision-making that started in a biology classroom on a Tuesday in September. And you do the work. Not for the waiting room. Not for the apology that comes after, not for the photo on the mantel or the text with the 2 daughters side by side. For the patient, for the same reason you have done everything you have ever done, because you are the doctor who is in the room when it matters. You decided that at 15. Nobody gave it to you. Nobody can take it back. If you have ever crossed a stage without the audience you deserved, I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments. And if this reminded you that the work speaks when nothing else will, share it with one person who needs to know that building in silence still counts. Subscribe to the channel if you have not yet. There is another story in the description I think will hit exactly where this one did. I will see you next time.